Hi, I'm Anna of All Trades, and because I recently showed how to carve a spoon from dry wood, I figured it was only fair to show you how to carve one from wet wood as well. So let's get started.
I get my hands dirty, they show me no mercy, so I just keep working.
One of my favorite things about spoon carving with green, wet, or recently harvested wood is because the wood is usually free. If you live in a city, you can call your local arborist and ask them if they have any branches you can have, or if you have acreage like I do, you can wait for a tree to fall and then harvest some of the wood yourself. Because that log has been sitting for a little while, I want to cut a fresh spot, and I'm actually going to look and see if there's any branches or anything else that were coming out of it, because that's going to make the wood a little bit harder to carve. A lot of people are going to wonder why I'm using a battery-powered saw, and that's because basically battery technology has improved greatly over the last few years, and quite frankly, I'm not using a saw often enough for me to justify taking the time to maintain a gas engine. So this thing may cut a little bit slower, but it has a lot of power and it'll get the job done just fine. Actually, note that there's a little knot here, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to avoid this knot here, and I'll get plenty of usable wood for a spoon right in between them. Then the only negative of using battery power is when you forgot to change your battery power before you went up, and you have to karate kick the rest of the cut to finish it. Thankfully though, back up at the house we've got plenty of batteries. Once you've got a round, that's when the real spoon-tasticness starts to begin. So we want to just take a look at this log in general. Oop. So in the center of the log here we have what's called the pith. The pith is the center of the wood, and we want to avoid using that at all costs. And so to be able to get the absolute most out of this log, we would want to make some cuts somewhat like this. Or if you want to have a specific appearance to your spoon, like for example, having those growth rings within the bowl of your spoon, you would consider that with the way that you chop your wood. So the nice thing about green woodworking is that you generally have quite a lot of log to deal with, so wasting some to be able to get the best possible outcome for your spoon is not that big of a deal. Plus, it all ends up being firewood, so, you know, a log like this potentially has about 300 spoons inside of it. However, I don't have the time or capacity to be able to carve 300 spoons before it goes bad. But I can pick the best parts of the log and choose the best parts for the spoon, and then burn the rest and stay warm all winter long. When it comes to actually getting those desirable pieces of wood out, there are a lot of different ways you can do it. You can split it up with an axe and then bandsaw it, or you can use what's called a froe, which this is a froe, and this is my preferred method. My favorite branch for froing just broke, so I'm forced to use this until I can go back out into the woods and find a better one. The froe gives you a very controlled split of the wood, and that is going to allow you to use the strongest part of the wood for your spoon. If I have some extra wood to spare, then these little outside pieces are basically worthless to me. So I'll go in and take the inside pieces, and then also, because there's this little knot here, I'm going to get rid of that entirely. So I'm going to end up using basically this little chunk for a spoon and throw that little chunk away. Get rid of this little bit while I've still got more mass. Then I'll get rid of that little knot while I've still got a little bit more mass. And then that becomes garbage, and this becomes my spoon blank. If you don't have a froe, you can also use an axe, and then you just have to be a little bit more controlled with your axe blows. But knowing that I want to get rid of the pith there, I'm going to make sure to try to hit it in such a way that I don't lose too much of the rest of my wood. Or if I am extra confident, I can also get rid of this round bit as well. So I want to always start with the smallest cut that I have to make and then move into the larger cuts. So now I can try to split the pith away as well. So that's going to give you a pretty decent carving block as well. Let's talk for a second about wood grain. The huge benefit, other than getting free wood for using green wood, is that you're able to find within the forest wood that matches your design aesthetic that you're going for. So for example, if you want to carve a ladle with a bowl like this, like my friend Lee Stouffer carved, you need to find a piece of wood that actually bends that way and carve it, rather than carving it out of a super thick piece of wood and just cutting out that shape. Because were you to just cut it out of a straight piece of wood, when you put any kind of pressure here, the spoon would just snap. So here you can see that the wood grain actually follows the curve of the scoop perfectly. And the way that you're gonna do that is by finding a branch or a crook that follows that curve the same way. Once you have your block of wood ready, it's very important to know where you're trying to go. My friend Emmett made me this pattern sheet, which was really awesome to be able to get some design ideas. Another thing that I did a while ago was buy some spoons from a spoon carver that I admire. Not so that I can copy their designs per se, but basically so that I can get an idea of what to look for, shape, grain direction wise, etc. And the other thing too is that if you can replicate something that someone else does, then you really know that your skill set has been honed to a certain level that you can start creating designs of your own. And that's where we all want to go eventually. For this video, I'm going to use one of my friend Pat's spoons as a design. The reason I've chosen him is because he is a production spoon carver who does this for a living. He is able to whip these out super quick. They have some very interesting design details, and it's just a fairly easy shape, size, and everything else. Pat's information is linked below. Let's get this design onto wood. So I want to get the outer design as well as the side design, because this is where I really learned the most as far as spoon design goes. Getting the crook or the angle here right has always been one of my biggest challenges as I've been doing spoon carving. So now I've got the shape and the crook marked into the wood. It's at this point that you can either move to the axe to remove the rest of your waste, or you can take it over to the bandsaw. If you are going to use an axe for chopping out your waste, it's really handy to have a block like this available. I had seen this one time in one of Peter Follensby's posts, and I've been using it here for a while, and I absolutely love it. This block gives you the opportunity to work at a comfortable height, but it also gives you a super solid surface to chop against. For expediency's sake, and because I would love to show you another trick, let's take this over to the bandsaw. And here's a really awesome trick I recently learned from my friend Jimmy Dresta. You can actually take all of these pieces and put them back together and then really safely be able to make the rest of your cuts. I'm making little stop cuts here so that I don't have to back my saw to the blade. And now I can take away those and I have a pretty decent shape to work off of. Once I take my blank from the bandsaw or from the chopping block, my next step, if I'm here in my own shop, is going to be to this vise. And basically from there on out, it's going to be exactly the same process as I did in my other videos. So if you haven't seen that already, go check that out right now. Speaking of this vise and a lot of the other tools that I use for spoon carving, I have links for them below, but I got them from Woodcraft. And as you know, Woodcraft is one of the main sponsors for my channel and a huge part of the reason that I get to be able to make videos like these. Woodcraft is a fantastic resource that you can go to in store to get expert help, or you can visit them online and get the tools that you need as well. If you don't have a vise like that and you still do have a workbench or another surface that you can actually use a piece of rope as a really handy vise in and of itself. This is a trick that I learned from my good friend Tom Henscheid, who actually taught me almost everything I know about spoon carving. And basically I'm folding the rope in half and I'm gonna put it up through one of my dog holes in my bench. I'm gonna make myself a nice little noose for the spoon basically. And then I'm going to take the long part of the rope. I'm gonna find out where my foot is gonna be, and then I'm just gonna tie a knot. So I'm pulling on it down there with my foot. I can loosen it by moving my foot up or down. I can move the position of the knot so that I'm holding it comfortably. So now I can basically just use my foot as a gas pedal and hold my work nice and safely as I'm working. And then for those that have one, another great option for work holding in spoon carving is a shave horse. And if you haven't seen that video, make sure you go and check that out as well. This allows me to raise and lower the head and get clamping power in a very efficient manner, because all I'm doing is pushing with my feet, and I can reposition the spoon however I want. And then of course, if you're just sitting by the fire, you can use two tools, a knife and a hook knife, to carve out the rest of your spoon. My favorite way to carve when I'm just using a knife is to use supported cuts that have a stopping point whenever possible. So a lot of times I'll hold my knife and then I'll actually guide it with my opposite hand, and in this squeezing motion I'm able to move the piece and the knife to be able to get the most leverage possible. And I'm always paying really close attention to the grain direction, because especially in these little turning points here, the wood wants to be carved this direction going down and then this direction going up. So I often like to leave a little extra meat there so that I can come back later after I've finished shaping the rest of the spoon and clean that up. And oftentimes I'll wait until that wood is fully dry and sand that transition point if it's giving me a whole lot of trouble during the initial carving process. Again, here I'm protected from getting cut because I'm using the strength in my lats to pull the wood apart. One of the nice things about carving green wood is that it just carves so much easier than dry wood. And so you can actually see, as I'm taking these scoops, the moisture within the wood. So at this point, this thing is getting pretty stringy, so I'm going to wait for it to dry to do any finished carving that I have to do. But if I were sitting by the fire and I needed to have a spoon to eat some beans, this is going to suffice just fine. And I also wanted to show you too, this is what ended up from the pattern. So obviously I am not a production spoon carver, but I used this spoon as a pattern, and I tried to emulate it as much as possible, and it still ended up being a completely different spoon. So that's the thing about spoon carving. It's really good to look at people that you admire and look at designs that you admire and try to emulate them as much as possible, and then continue to hone your craft to the point that you are able to actually emulate them and come up with designs of your own. So this is a perfectly acceptable spoon that was basically a tree about an hour and a half ago, so I'm pretty pleased with it. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and for supporting my channel in that way. If you'd like to support me in other ways, there are links for my Patreon and merchandise below. I hope you leave this video feeling challenged, inspired, and excited to get outside and to do things with your own hands as well. Cheers. So we'll give it a shot. We'll give this a shot. Whoops. Well, incidentally, that actually did go right to my line, but we're gonna have to lose a little bit more of this if we're gonna use the axe. Good God. All right. God. There we go.